cliffhanger version of your amusement park horror story ending. It's designed for YouTube to leave viewers hooked and eager for the next part. I thought I'd made it. I thought I could survive until dawn. But when the phone stopped ringing, I looked out the office window and I saw them. Dozens of pale faces pressed against the glass, grinning like they'd been waiting for me all along. The window shattered, and suddenly the whole park came alive. Rides spun, music blared, shadows filled every seat, every corner, and they were all looking at me. I ran to the exit, but the gate wouldn't open. That's when I saw the logbook lying on the ground. The words were already written, describing everything I had just done. At the very bottom, there was one final warning: don't run. And as I turned, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. Welcome back to Doctors. Tonight, I've got a chilling tale for you, straight from an amusement park in West Virginia. But this isn't about roller coasters and laughter. It's about rules. Rules that must never be broken. As you listen, imagine yourself walking those dark midways where every shadow hides a secret and every whisper knows your name. Before we begin, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you do if you found yourself trapped here after midnight. I never thought I'd end up working the night shift at an amusement park. Growing up, I used to love the flashing lights, the smell of cotton candy, the laughter of kids running around with sticky hands, and the echoing screams of thrill seekers strapped into roller coasters. But everything changes when you're no longer a visitor. When you're part of the skeleton crew left behind after the gates shut, the magic turns into something else, something darker. The amusement park in question sits on the outskirts of a small West Virginia town. It isn't one of those massive theme parks with international fame, but it's big enough to draw crowds from nearby states. During the day, it's alive, buzzing with families, couples, and tourists. At night, once the last visitor leaves and the rides wind down, it becomes a place that feels wrong. That was something I noticed on my very first night. I had just gotten the job after answering a vague ad in the local paper. They needed overnight personnel to maintain security, keep rides in working order, and handle general maintenance. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the lights on in my tiny apartment. Besides, I figured it would be an easy gig. After all, what could possibly happen in a closed amusement park? My first night, the supervisor, a grizzled man named Frank, handed me a laminated sheet. His voice was flat, like he had said these words hundreds of times before. You follow these rules and you'll be fine. Don't follow them and you won't last a week. I thought he was exaggerating until I read the list. 1. Never ride the Ferris wheel after midnight. 2. Do not answer the carousel if it calls your name. 3. If you hear laughter near the funhouse, ignore it and walk the other way. 4. Keep the clown statues covered. They must never see the moonlight. 5. The roller coaster will run on its own sometimes. Do not attempt to stop it. 6. If you see a child alone after 2 a.m., report it immediately. Do not approach. 7. Leave before sunrise. I had laughed nervously at first. I thought it was some kind of initiation prank. But Frank didn't laugh with me. He just gave me a look that froze the blood in my veins. A look that said he wasn't joking. You think I'm kidding, don't you? He muttered. Read it again, and this time take it seriously. I reread the list. The words suddenly seemed heavier, more sinister. What happens if I break one of them? I asked carefully. Frank sighed, rubbed his temple, and said only, You don't want to know. That was it. No explanation, no elaboration, just those rules and that warning. When the clock struck midnight, I was alone. The rides loomed in the dark, skeletal shadows against the pale glow of the moon. The Ferris wheel stood at the center like some massive watchful eye. The roller coaster tracks twisted like a snake frozen mid-strike. The carousel horses, draped in dusty covers, looked like sleeping ghosts. I told myself it was just a job. Walk the perimeter, check the gates, make sure no kids had snuck in, and then wait out the shift until 4:30 when Frank came back. Easy. But that first night made me realize the rules weren't there for fun. They were survival instructions. Around 12:15, I heard a creak. The Ferris wheel began to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed. The metal groaned, the seats clinked against their chains, and the whole structure lit up with pale yellow bulbs, even though the power was supposed to be off. I froze. The first rule came back to me immediately. Never ride the Ferris wheel after midnight. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I watched as the wheel carried empty seats upward, higher and higher, until it reached the top. That's when I saw it. There was someone in one of the cars. It wasn't possible. I had walked the gates, checked the locks. Nobody was in here but me. But clear as day, in the topmost seat, there was a figure. Small, fragile, a child. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure was still staring straight ahead. I felt a tightness in my chest. Was it real? A trick of the light? Or worse, some kind of test? The wheel spun again, bringing the figure down toward me. My heart hammered louder with every turn. By the time the seat reached the bottom, I braced myself to see a child's face staring back at me. But the car was empty. The ride slowed, the lights flickered, and then the wheel stopped altogether. Silence fell again. The sound of the night pressed against my ears. I told myself it was my imagination. That was the only way to keep going. But then came the carousel. It was about 1:30 when I heard it. A faint tune carried on the wind, soft, tinkling music like an old calliope. I turned toward the covered carousel and felt the hair on my neck rise. The song was coming from under the tarp. I took a step back. The music grew louder, and then I heard it. A voice. My own name whispered low, almost sweetly. Ethan, I stumbled. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't told anyone my name except Frank. No one else knew me here, but the carousel knew. The tarp trembled as though something inside was moving. A horse's head pushed against the fabric, stretching it out. Its wooden teeth glistened in the dim light. Ethan, the voice came again, clearer this time. Come ride with us. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet carried me backward instead, step by careful step, until I was far enough to break into a sprint. I didn't stop until I was behind the concession stands, panting, hands shaking. I pressed my back against the wall and slid down. My chest heaved. My pulse thundered in my ears. For the first time, I thought about quitting. No paycheck was worth this. But then I remembered the look in Frank's eyes when he handed me the rules. This wasn't something you could just walk away from. Not without consequences. That night stretched on endlessly. The shadows seemed to move when I wasn't looking, and more than once I thought I heard footsteps behind me, only to find nothing when I turned. The laughter near the funhouse started around 3, high-pitched, childish, echoing off the walls. I didn't even think about going near it. I walked in the opposite direction, clutching my flashlight like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. By 4:30, I was trembling from exhaustion and fear. When Frank showed up, his face was unreadable. You made it, he said simply. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to know what the hell I had just witnessed. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. My throat was dry, my words locked away. Frank must have seen it in my eyes because he gave me a short nod. Good, that means you listened. Come back tomorrow, same time. And just like that, he walked off, leaving me in the silence of the dying night. I should have quit right then, but I didn't. I told myself I'd give it one more night, one more chance to prove to myself that it had all been my imagination. But deep down, I already knew. This place was wrong. This place was alive. And it didn't want me to leave. The next evening, as I drove back to the amusement park, my stomach churned with unease. I kept telling myself I was an idiot for coming back. No amount of money was worth what I had seen. But a strange pull kept me from quitting. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was something else. Something the park itself had sunk into me that first night. Frank met me at the gate again, but this time he didn't hand me the rules. He didn't need to. I already had them memorized. Instead, he just gave me a look that carried no sympathy and said, "Stay sharp. Tonight will be harder." I wanted to ask what he meant, but he walked away before I could speak. The park looked different that night, even before the clock hit midnight. The air was heavier, as if the rides themselves were waiting. The Ferris wheel was still, but I couldn't look at it without remembering the figure I'd seen in its seats. The carousel sat in silence, covered and unmoving, but I swore I could feel its horses staring at me through the tarp. I decided to keep moving, to stick to the perimeter. That was the plan. Keep walking, avoid the rules, and wait until Frank came back. But plans don't mean much in a place that bends reality. At 12:10, the roller coaster roared to life. The sound rattled through the park, metal clashing against metal as the tracks shook. The cars, empty as far as I could see, shot forward, climbing the incline. The lights on the ride flickered on, glowing a sickly orange as though the whole thing had caught fire. I remembered the rule, the fifth one. The coaster will run on its own sometimes. Do not attempt to stop it. I stood frozen, flashlight clutched in my hand, staring as the cars climbed higher and higher, and then I heard something that turned my blood cold. Screaming. Not the mechanical groan of the ride, not the clatter of wheels against tracks. Real, human screams. Dozens of them. Terrified voices crying out in pain and panic. The cars reached the top of the incline and plunged downward. The screams grew louder, echoing across the park. I staggered back, my legs trembling. The coaster twisted through its loops and curves, and though my eyes swore the seats were empty, my ears told me otherwise. I wanted to run, but something made me stay rooted to the spot, watching. Maybe it was fascination, maybe horror, maybe both. The ride thundered on until it finally slowed, screeching to a stop at the platform. The air fell silent. I thought it was over. But then, faintly, I heard whispers near the loading area. The sound of feet shuffling, like people getting off the ride. I forced myself to turn away to obey the rule. I didn't want to see what was there. The rest of the night was no kinder. Around 1, I passed the clown statues. They stood near the entrance of the funhouse, frozen in painted smiles, covered with large black sheets. Their shapes bulged under the fabric, arms stretched unnaturally wide. The wind tugged at the covers, and one of them shifted slightly, revealing the edge of a porcelain shoe. I pulled the fabric tighter, securing it. But as I did, I swore I felt something move underneath. Pressing back against my hand, I jerked away, my heart hammering. The tarp settled again, still as stone. I didn't linger. By 1:30, I was back near the carousel. It was quiet this time. No music, no whispers. But that made it worse. The silence felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to step closer. I didn't. Instead, I made my way toward the arcade section of the park. Rows of game booths stood empty, prizes still dangling on hooks. A giant stuffed bear stared at me with glassy eyes. I don't know why, but I had the sudden terrifying thought that if I looked away, it would move closer. That was when I heard it. A child crying. The sound was faint at first, carried on the wind. I froze in place, my blood running cold. I remembered the 6th rule. If you see a child alone after 2 a.m., report it immediately. Do not approach. I checked my watch. 2:03. The crying grew louder, coming from between the booths. My hands shook as I pulled out my radio, the one Frank had given me on the first night. I clicked it on, static crackling through the speaker. "Frank," I whispered, my throat dry. There's a child here." No response. The crying came closer. "Frank," I said again, louder this time. "Do you copy?" The static continued, but then I heard a faint voice, not Frank's, a child's, whispering through the radio. "Help me." I dropped it. The device clattered against the pavement. The crying was only a few feet away now, just beyond the corner of the booth. My instincts screamed at me to run, but curiosity pulled me closer. Slowly, trembling, I peeked around the corner. And there it was. A small boy, maybe 6 years old, standing in the dirt. His clothes were old-fashioned, like something from decades ago, a striped shirt with suspenders, scuffed leather shoes. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were empty, black voids that swallowed the light. He stopped crying when he saw me, his mouth curled into a smile. "Play with me," he whispered. Every muscle in my body locked. I stumbled backward, shaking my head violently. "No," I muttered, my voice breaking. "No, no, no." The boy stepped forward, tilting his head. "Why not?" I turned and ran. I didn't stop to look back. I sprinted past the booths, past the carousel, past the looming shadow of the Ferris wheel, until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. Finally, I ducked into one of the maintenance sheds and slammed the door shut behind me. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and rust. My chest heaved as I leaned against the wall, my ears straining for any sound outside. And then I heard it, knocking. 3 soft knocks on the shed door. "Play with me," the boy's voice whispered from the other side. I pressed my hands over my ears and squeezed my eyes shut, rocking back and forth like a terrified child. "Go away," I begged. "Please, go away." The knocking stopped. Silence returned. I don't know how long I stayed there, curled in the corner of that shed, But eventually the darkness outside began to fade. Dawn crept into the park, and with it came an eerie calm. When I finally opened the shed door, the boy was gone. The rides were still. The park looked almost normal again. At 4:30, Frank showed up as usual. He found me sitting outside the shed, pale and trembling. "You saw the child," he said, not asking, just stating. I nodded weakly. He sighed, rubbing his weathered face. "You did the right thing. You didn't touch him. That's the only reason you're still here." What would have happened if I did?" I whispered. Frank's eyes were tired, haunted. "You wouldn't be asking me that question." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The morning sun crept over the horizon, bathing the park in gold, but the light didn't bring me comfort. It only made the shadows seem more patient, like they were waiting for nightfall. Frank finally patted my shoulder, though his touch was heavy, almost reluctant. "Get some rest. You've got another shift tonight." Another shift. The words sank into me like knives. I wanted to say no, to tell him I was done, that I was never coming back. But when I opened my mouth, all that came out was silence. The park had its hooks in me now, and I was starting to realize something terrifying. This wasn't just a job, it was a trap, and I wasn't sure I would ever escape. By the time my third night rolled around, I'd stopped pretending that this was just a job. The amusement park was no ordinary place. It was alive, hungry, and it played with me like a cat plays with a mouse. All day before my shift, I couldn't shake the image of that child's empty eyes or the sound of the roller coaster carrying invisible passengers. Every creak of my apartment walls made me jump. Every shadow felt like it was watching me. I told myself I wasn't going back. I even started to pack a bag, planning to leave town altogether. But when the sun dipped behind the hills and darkness crept in, I found myself driving back to the park. My hands gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, but I didn't stop. It was as if something had reached inside me and taken hold, steering me back against my will. When I arrived, Frank was waiting near the gate as always. His eyes studied me with something between pity and recognition. "You thought about leaving," he said flatly. I froze. "How did you?" "I've been in your shoes," he interrupted. "We all think about it, but once you've worked a night, you're bound here. The park doesn't let go so easily." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What happens if I quit?" Frank looked away, his jaw tightening. "Don't." That was all he said before walking off, leaving me standing there with a pit growing in my stomach. That night, I knew the park would test me again. And it didn't take long. Around midnight, the laughter began. It was faint at first, drifting across the empty pathways, bouncing off the walls of the funhouse. I froze in my tracks, every hair on my body standing on end. The third rule came rushing back to me. If you hear laughter near the funhouse, ignore it and walk the other way. So I turned on my heel and started to walk, but the laughter followed. At first it was one voice, high-pitched, childlike. Then another joined, and another. Soon it was a chorus of giggles and shrieks, circling me no matter where I went. My flashlight beam shook as I tried to stay steady, forcing myself not to run. The funhouse loomed in the corner of my eye, its dark windows like gaping mouths. Painted clowns on its walls grinned wickedly in the moonlight. The sound of laughter seemed to seep from the building itself, echoing through the glass and metal. "Come play," a voice sang. "It's so much fun inside." I clenched my teeth and kept walking, faster now. But the voices grew louder, closer, until it felt like someone was right behind me. I snapped my head around. No one was there, and then the mirrors started. It shouldn't have been possible. I was outside, far from the entrance. But suddenly, reflections flickered in the corner of my vision. Shards of glass glimmered as if invisible walls of mirrors surrounded me, trapping me in a maze. In the corner of one reflection, I saw myself walking, but the reflection wasn't in sync. It smiled when I didn't. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The reflection tilted its head unnaturally, its eyes dark and hollow, and then it mouthed the words I was terrified to hear. "Stay!" The laughter erupted all around me, deafening now, and I bolted. I didn't care if the rules said not to acknowledge it. I had to get away. I ran down the pathways, my flashlight bouncing wildly, until the funhouse was far behind me. When I finally stopped, chest heaving, I realized where I was. The clown statues. They stood tall and still, covered in black sheets. Their shapes loomed against the night, grotesque even with the fabric draped over them. The fourth rule came crashing back into my mind. Keep the clown statues covered. They must never see the moonlight. I told myself to keep moving, to get as far away as possible, but the wind picked up, sharp and sudden, tugging at the tarps. One of the covers slipped. It was just a corner, just enough for pale porcelain skin to catch the light. My chest tightened as I rushed forward, fumbling with the fabric to pull it back down. My fingers shook as I struggled with the knot, tying it tighter this time. But in those few seconds, I saw its face. The statue's painted smile stretched wider than I remembered. Its glassy eyes seemed to glint with something that wasn't there before. For the briefest moment, I swore its head turned, following me. I stumbled back, heart pounding, staring at the covered figure. The tarp was still now, unmoving. But I knew what I saw. I wasn't alone anymore. The rest of the night blurred into a haze of terror. The laughter faded, but shadows seemed to follow me wherever I went. Every ride loomed like a predator, waiting for me to break a rule. My nerves were shot, every sound setting me on edge. At 3:30, I found myself near the food court, desperate to keep moving, desperate to stay away from the rides. The smell of old grease and burnt sugar lingered in the air, and for a moment it felt almost normal. Until I heard it, the faint squeak of a shoe against pavement. I whipped around, shining my flashlight down the empty path. Nothing. But then came another squeak and another, like slow, deliberate footsteps drawing closer. My light caught movement just ahead. A figure was standing near one of the darkened concession stands. I thought it was a person at first, maybe Frank, maybe a trespasser. But as my beam steadied, I realized what it was. A clown. Not a statue, not a painting. A clown standing in the middle of the path, motionless. Its face was pale, its painted grin stretched unnaturally wide. Its costume was tattered, dirty, stained in places I didn't want to think about. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just stood there, watching me. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the flashlight. "Stay back," I whispered, though my voice cracked with fear. The clown tilted its head slowly, its grin never changing. Then, without a sound, it lifted its hand and waved. I ran. I didn't care where. I didn't care what rule I might break. I just ran. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop until I saw the faint glow of the maintenance shed ahead. I burst inside, slamming the door shut, gasping for air. And then I froze. The shed wasn't empty. In the far corner, something was crouched. Its body was twisted, its back bent at an impossible angle. For a moment, I thought it was another statue, discarded here. But then its head snapped toward me, and I saw its face. Another clown. Its painted eyes stared into mine, its grin impossibly wide. Slowly, it began to stand, its limbs cracking as though they hadn't moved in years. I backed against the wall, my heart in my throat. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The clown took one step toward me, then another. The floorboards creaked under its weight. And then the door burst open. "Out!" Frank barked, grabbing my arm and yanking me outside. His flashlight swept across the shed, and in an instant, it was empty. No clown, no twisted figure, nothing. I stumbled, my knees nearly giving out. "I saw it," I stammered. "It was in there. I told you to keep the statues covered." Frank snapped, his voice like a whip. "You let them see the moonlight. Now they know you." His grip on my arm was iron, his face grim. "From here on, you're not safe anywhere in this park." The words sank into me like ice water. Not safe anywhere. As the first hints of dawn painted the sky, Frank finally released me. His expression was hollow, almost resigned. "You made it through tonight," he said. "But tomorrow will be worse." I wanted to scream, to tell him I was done, that I was never coming back. But the words caught in my throat, because deep down, I already knew the truth. Even if I wanted to leave, the park wouldn't let me, and the clowns were waiting. By the fourth night, I knew the park wasn't just dangerous, it was changing me. Sleep had become impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hollow stare of the child, the mirrors that smiled without me, and the painted grin of the clown inside the shed. The rules weren't just guidelines anymore. They were the only thread keeping me alive. Yet I kept going back. Whether it was fear of what would happen if I quit, or some strange pull the park had over me, I couldn't stop myself. By the time the sun set again, I was already driving toward the gates. Frank was waiting for me, just like every night. He looked more worn than before, as though each shift drained something from him. His eyes lingered on me longer this time, filled with a heaviness I didn't understand. "You should know," he said as I approached. "The park doesn't like that you've lasted this long." I frowned, clutching the strap of my flashlight. "What do you mean?" He sighed, lighting a cigarette with shaky hands. "Most people break on the second or third night. They either quit or the park takes them. But you've obeyed. You've survived. That makes you interesting to it." "Interesting how?" I asked, though my voice was barely above a whisper. Frank blew out smoke, his face unreadable. "It'll push harder, bend the rules, twist them until you don't know if following them will save you anymore." His words sat like lead in my stomach. Before I could respond, the clock struck midnight. The park stirred. That night, everything felt wrong from the start. The Ferris wheel didn't move, the carousel didn't sing, the roller coaster stayed silent. But the silence wasn't a relief. It was suffocating. It was the kind of silence that waits, like something crouched in the dark, ready to spring. I decided to walk near the arcade again, hoping the familiar booths would give me some sense of safety. But when I rounded the corner, I stopped dead. The prizes were gone. Every booth I passed had empty hooks, bare shelves, hollow racks. The stuffed animals, the toys, even the cheap plastic trinkets, all missing. My skin crawled as I stepped closer to one of the booths, shining my flashlight over the emptiness. That's when I saw it, a stuffed bear sitting in the middle of the path. It was the same one I'd noticed 2 nights ago, with glassy black eyes and a stitched smile. Only now it wasn't hanging in a booth. It was upright, facing me, its fur matted with grime. I froze. The beam of my light quivered as I stared at it. Then from the shadows behind me, I heard the faint sound of giggling. I whipped around, but the path was empty. When I turned back, the bear was closer. My breath caught in my throat. It hadn't walked, had it? It couldn't have. It was a toy, just a toy. But every time I blinked, it seemed to move. A step closer, a tilt of the head. Its black eyes never left mine. I backed away slowly, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the flashlight. "Stay away," I whispered, though my voice shook. The giggling grew louder, circling me. It wasn't children this time. It was higher, sharper. Clowns. I turned and ran. My footsteps pounded against the pavement, echoing in the emptiness. I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to see if the bear was following. I just ran, weaving through the paths until I found myself near the carousel. For the first time that night, it was uncovered. The tarp that had always shrouded the horses was gone. The figures stood in the moonlight, their wooden bodies gleaming. Their painted eyes seemed to glimmer as they stared straight ahead. I stopped, my heart in my throat. The music began. The Calliope tune drifted into the air, haunting and sweet. The horses started to move, their legs jerking stiffly as the carousel spun. Their mouths opened wider than wood should allow, teeth glinting under the lights. And then I heard my name, not whispered this time, sung. Ethan. The horses' heads turned in unison, their hollow gazes locking onto me. Their wooden jaws clattered open and shut, like teeth chattering in hunger. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, and scrambled to get away. But as I turned to run, I saw something that froze me in place. The child. He stood in the middle of the path, pale as ever, his black eyes reflecting the carousel lights. He didn't cry this time. He didn't smile. He just stood there, staring at me. Behind him, shapes moved in the shadows. Tall, lanky figures swaying side to side. Clowns. Their painted faces glowed faintly in the moonlight, their grins impossibly wide. I was trapped. The carousel behind me, the child, and clowns ahead. My breath came in ragged gasps as my flashlight flickered in my hand. The rules ran through my mind, desperate for an answer. Don't ride the Ferris wheel. Don't answer the carousel. Don't approach the child. Keep the clowns covered. Leave before sunrise. But what about when they all come for you at once? The child tilted his head slowly, like a predator studying prey. His lips moved, and though the words were barely audible, I heard them clearly. "You belong here now." The clowns began to move, their footsteps slow and deliberate, their painted shoes scraping against the pavement. Their giggles rose in pitch, overlapping, turning into something shrill and unbearable. I ran. I don't know how I managed to push past them, but adrenaline took over. I sprinted through the maze of paths, my flashlight barely lighting the way. The laughter followed, echoing from every corner, closer no matter which direction I turned. Finally, I spotted the maintenance shed. my only refuge. My legs screamed in protest, but I forced myself to keep running until I reached the door. I slammed it shut behind me, chest heaving. But the shed wasn't safe anymore. The walls creaked, the shadows shifted, and in the far corner I saw movement. Not a clown this time. A mirror. It hadn't been there before. A tall, warped mirror leaning against the wall. My reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed. For a moment, I almost believed it was normal, until it blinked. I hadn't. My reflection smiled, slow and deliberate. Its eyes darkened, hollowing into pits of black. Then it stepped forward, out of the glass. I fell backward, scrambling across the floor as my reflection crawled toward me on hands and knees, its grin stretching wider with every inch. The door burst open again. Frank stood there, flashlight blazing. "Get out!" he shouted, pulling me to my feet. He slammed the shed door shut behind us, his face grim. "What the hell was that?" I gasped, my voice shaking. "The park's done playing," he said, his voice hollow. "It wants you, and it won't stop until it gets you." We stood there in the darkness, the sound of giggling and carousel music drifting through the night. My body trembled with fear, my mind reeling with questions I couldn't ask, because the truth was already sinking in. The rules weren't enough anymore, and I was running out of time. The silence after the scream was heavier than any noise. It pressed on my ears, making me aware of the blood rushing in my veins and the shallow breath scraping my throat. I wanted to believe that what I had heard was the wind, or some trick of the machinery, but the sound of it still lingered in my head. Human, desperate, raw. I took one cautious step forward, the gravel crunching beneath my boot, and scanned the dark stretch of the midway. The rides loomed around me like skeletons of beasts long dead, their arms frozen in positions of joy that now looked twisted and cruel. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint clinking of chains, like the sound of a roller coaster being dragged up a hill, except no rides were running tonight. The flashlight flickered again, and for a terrifying second, I stood in total darkness. When it came back, I nearly dropped it. Just ahead, at the edge of the beam, something moved. Not the steady pace of a person, but a jittery stop-start shuffle like a puppet pulled on invisible strings. I froze, my throat tight, every muscle screaming at me to turn and run. It shuffled forward into clearer view. It was wearing a faded park uniform, though the fabric looked older, moth-eaten and torn, like it had been buried for years. The name tag on its chest was scratched, but faintly readable. It wasn't any of the names from the roster I had memorized. The head tilted, too far to the side, like its neck wasn't working right. Its face was pale, stretched tight, with lips pulled back over teeth that seemed too long. The eyes, those were worse than anything. They weren't blank. They were aware. They stared at me with the hunger of something that remembered being alive, but was no longer bound by life. I backed away slowly, clutching the flashlight with trembling hands. Every step I took, it matched with the twitching shuffle, its jerks accompanied by the faint scraping of shoes over gravel. I didn't want to break into a run, not yet. Running would mean noise, and noise would mean drawing every other shadow in this cursed place. I whispered to myself, just to hear a human voice. "It's not real. It's part of the rules. It's—" The thing twitched closer. My heart slammed against my ribs, and before I could stop myself, I spun around and ran. The gravel kicked up beneath my boots, and the flashlight beam swung wildly across the midway, catching glimpses of painted clown faces, empty prize stalls, the Ferris wheel looming like a black halo against the cloudy sky. Behind me, I heard it give chase. But it wasn't the sound of steady footsteps. It was something else, something wrong. A scraping, a dragging, a broken rhythm, like bones grinding together in protest. I dove between two stalls, pressing myself against the damp wood and forcing myself to stay quiet. My breath came out in quick bursts, fogging in the chill night air. The scraping stopped. The silence was worse. I wanted to look, but I was terrified that if I moved, I'd draw its attention. I clenched my teeth and kept my body still, every muscle screaming with the need to flee. And then, faintly, from the other side of the stall, I heard a whisper. My name, drawn out in a low, gurgling voice that did not belong to any human throat. I bit down hard on my lip to keep from screaming. The rules came back to me in fragments, echoing in my head. Don't answer if someone calls your name after midnight. Don't let them know you heard. Don't acknowledge them. I pressed my hands over my ears and squeezed my eyes shut. The whisper came again, closer now, sliding under my skin like a knife. My name, repeated in a mockery of familiarity, as though it had been practiced 1,000 times. After a long, aching minute, the sound faded. The silence returned, and I dared to peel my hands away from my ears. The night was heavy, still, waiting. I slid along the side of the stall until I reached the corner, then peeked out cautiously. Nothing. The midway stretched out empty, the ride standing tall and motionless against the night sky. No twitching figure, no pale face. I forced myself to keep moving, though my legs felt like lead. The office wasn't far, but every shadow I passed seemed thicker. Every statue and painted clown grinned wider than before. Halfway there, I noticed something strange. The ground beneath me wasn't the same gravel as before. It had shifted to soft, damp soil, the kind that belongs in the woods, not in an amusement park. I looked down and saw footprints pressed into the dirt. Bare feet, dozens of them, all facing the same direction, toward the center of the park. The Ferris wheel loomed ahead of me, and I realized the prints were leading me there. I wanted to turn back, but my body kept moving, drawn like a moth to flame. The wheel towered above everything, its silhouette massive and unnatural in the cloudy night. For a moment, I thought I saw movement in its seats, shapes swaying as though occupied by people who weren't supposed to be there. And then the wheel groaned. The sound of gears turning broke the silence, slow at first, then steady. The Ferris wheel was moving. I staggered backward, my flashlight beam catching the skeletal arms of the ride as they lifted the seats higher into the sky. But there was no power. The generators were off. The entire park had been dead silent when I clocked in. Yet the wheel creaked and turned, carrying its invisible passengers higher and higher until the topmost seat vanished into the low-hanging clouds. A deep chill ran through me. I didn't want to be here anymore. I wanted to tear off the uniform, run for the exit, and never come back. But the rules came back again, sharp in my mind. Don't leave before dawn. Don't abandon your shift. I knew what happened to people who broke the rules. I turned away from the wheel and stumbled toward the office, forcing myself not to look back. The whisper of my name echoed faintly behind me, carried on the wind, but I ignored it. I kept moving, eyes fixed on the faint yellow glow of the office window. When I finally reached the door, I pushed it open and collapsed inside, slamming it shut behind me. The hum of the emergency lights overhead was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. But the relief didn't last. The desk phone was ringing. It sat on the corner of the desk, an old beige rotary model that hadn't worked in years. The receiver rattled against its base with every shrill ring. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't even want to look at it. But the sound drilled into my skull, demanding attention. The rules surfaced again, cruel in their timing. Don't answer the phone after midnight. The ringing grew louder, sharper, until it felt like the whole room was shaking with the sound. I clamped my hands over my ears and sank into the chair, rocking back and forth as though movement alone could block out the noise. My lips moved in a silent prayer, anything to make the ringing stop. And then, mercifully, it did. The silence that followed was suffocating. Slowly, with trembling fingers, I reached for the logbook to mark down what I had seen, as the rules demanded. My handwriting shook, the words slanting across the page. Twitching figure. Ferris wheel moved. Phone rang. Didn't answer. When I set the pen down, I noticed something I hadn't before. The logbook wasn't empty. The pages were filled, every line written in the same shaky hand, each entry describing things eerily similar to what I had just witnessed. Figures in the park, the Ferris wheel turning on its own, voices calling names, the phone ringing, and each entry ended with the same final note. Don't look out the office window after you hear the phone. My heart sank. Because I had already heard the phone, and the urge to look outside was overwhelming. I sat frozen in the office chair, staring at the logbook, the words swimming across the page as though written in blood instead of ink. Don't look out the office window after you hear the phone. The warning pulsed in my skull like a heartbeat, but the longer I sat there, the stronger the pull became, an irresistible itch crawling beneath my skin. The office window was only a few feet away, the blinds drawn halfway, a sliver of night leaked through, and I thought I saw movement in it, shadows bending against the glass, shapes that weren't supposed to be there. I pressed my back against the chair, clutching the arms so hard my knuckles went white. I told myself I wouldn't look. I told myself I could resist. But the silence was unbearable, heavier than the ringing had been. It pressed down on me, making the air thick. And in that stillness, I swore I could hear breathing. Not mine, deeper, closer, just outside the window. I shut my eyes, forcing myself to breathe slow, to count. 1, 2, 3. The sound of glass tapping shattered the count. Once, twice. Something was knocking on the window. My body tensed, heart hammering. It was like when you were a child, hiding under blankets, hoping the monster would lose interest if you stayed still enough. But this thing wasn't going to leave. The knock came again, louder now, insistent. Then a voice. My voice. It called my name in perfect imitation, but not from the outside. It came from the other side of the room. My head snapped toward the desk, and the logbook was no longer open. It was closed, its cover dark and wet, like it had been left out in the rain. Water dripped from the edges, pattering onto the desk. I whispered a prayer I barely remembered from childhood, every syllable trembling. The knock on the window grew violent. The glass shook in its frame, and the blinds rattled. Whatever was outside wanted in. I stood on unsteady legs and backed toward the far wall, keeping my eyes away from the window. The rules screamed in my head. Don't look, don't look, don't look. But curiosity is a cruel thing. My chest burned with the effort to resist, but in the end, it wasn't enough. I looked. The blinds shifted just enough to show a fraction of the outside world, and in that crack, I saw them. Faces. Dozens of them, pressed against the glass. Pale, grinning, their teeth too sharp, their eyes too wide. They weren't people anymore. They were masks stretched over hunger. Their lips moved in unison, whispering my name in a chorus that made my bones ache. I staggered back, the chair tipping over behind me, and the window exploded inward. Shards of glass rained across the office, cutting into my arms as I shielded my face. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rot, wet earth, and something metallic. They were climbing through. One by one, pale figures poured into the room, their movements jerky, unnatural, as though pulled forward by invisible strings. Their grins never faltered, their whispers never stopped. I bolted for the door, fumbling with the handle as the first one's hand brushed my shoulder. Its skin was ice, burning cold, and I shoved the door open, stumbling into the midway once more. The park was alive. The ride spun and roared, lights flashing bright against the dark sky. The roller coaster screamed as if its cars carried invisible passengers. The carousel whirled with painted horses that kicked and twisted. The Ferris wheel turned faster and faster until the seats blurred. Music blasted from nowhere and everywhere, distorted carnival tunes that dug into my skull. And in the chaos, figures moved. Not just the pale ones from the window, but others, workers in uniforms decades old, children clutching balloons that sagged with rot, clowns with painted faces cracked like porcelain. All of them watching me. All of them smiling. I ran. Past the carousel, past the screaming roller coaster, past the stalls where the prizes seemed to twitch with life. The figures followed, their laughter and whispers blending with the carnival music in a nightmare symphony. The exit gate was ahead. The iron bars loomed, closed tight, but I didn't care. I threw myself at them, gripping the cold metal and shaking with all my strength. They didn't budge. Behind me, the whispers grew louder. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. The logbook. It lay open on the ground by the gate, its pages glowing faintly in the artificial light. With shaking hands, I picked it up. The page was already written, fresh ink bleeding across the lines. It described everything I had just done. Looking out the window, the glass breaking, the faces, the chase. And at the bottom, a single line stood out, darker than the rest. Don't run. The air shifted, and I turned slowly. They stood in a wide circle around me. The pale figures, the children, the clowns, all of them grinning, eyes fixed on me. The rides had gone silent, the music cut off, leaving only the sound of my own shallow breathing. One stepped forward, its mouth opened wider than any human mouth should, the grin splitting its face until the skin tore. Inside, there weren't teeth. There were more faces, smaller, whispering, mouthing my name over and over. I dropped the logbook. My legs gave out, and I sank to the dirt, surrounded on all sides. The last thing I saw before the world went black was the Ferris wheel, spinning faster than ever. its seats filled with the shadows of passengers who were not meant to exist. When I woke, I was sitting at the office desk. The logbook was open in front of me, and the pen was in my hand. The entry was already written, new worker assigned, new rules to follow, and at the bottom in my handwriting, though I had no memory of writing it, one final note: don't trust the logbook. And that's where we'll leave tonight's nightmare, an amusement park alive with screams, shadows, and rules no one should ever follow. What do you think? Was it just the park or something much older hiding within it? I'd love to hear your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with a friend who loves horror, and subscribe to Dr. Snooze for more terrifying tales. Until next time, keep the lights on, and remember, some rules are written for survival.